Around and around and around we go. 600, maybe 700 years apart, Isaiah and Jesus, Matthew, tell the same story. Obviously, Matthew adapts Isaiah, or if you prefer, Jesus tells a story that is strikingly similar to one from centuries earlier. The differences are what we're here to talk about this morning, but we begin with the essential insight that the fundamental questions that occupy us today are not new. Around and around we go. Vineyards, owners, tenants, workers, slaves, greed, injustice, reward and punishment. Who owns what? What's the punishment for inhumanity? Does everybody matter? Black lives, the lives of women, LGBTQ lives. Does my life matter? Divorced from any category? The me at the center of my being, in my soul. Different centuries, decades, nations, rulers, modes of transportation, ways of communication, styles of dress, but the same basic questions. Why am I? Why are we here? In Hamilton, one of my favorite songs is the one King George sings. Oceans rise, empires fall. We have seen each other through it all. You'll be back. We are back every century, every day, every breath. Back in moments and dialogues and crises, in relationships, predicaments, sunshine and sadness, cool black nights that have come and gone, gone and come since time began. How are we to respond, behave, acquit ourselves for what seems required at this moment? It's the Romans this time, a power like no other until today. Captivity without a way out. So should we be like Joseph, who dressed like an Egyptian in that ancient captivity? He ate apart from his brothers because Egyptians wouldn't mix with others. Or should we follow Daniel's example and be just who we are, whatever the consequences? Daniel preferred a den of lions to assimilation with the Babylonians. Should we follow Booker T. Washington and learn a trade and make the best of it? Or strive to join the talented 10th and outdo the oppressor at his own game? I can still hear my father now. Stop saying huh. Say yes. Speak up, boy. Stand up straight. My mother took me to Desmond's and Silverwood's, not Frederick of Hollywood. If my skin were not this pretty brown, I would have looked and sounded just like them. Conform, maintain, blend in, stand out, do them. Do you? Nancy's not here this morning, so I can talk about her. Talk about her family. I got permission. Because y'all might tell her. I know just who, too. She made some edits. Nancy's got a younger sister, Carol, 1 year younger. When Nancy graduated from high school, she went straight to college. Then she flirted with doing a doctoral degree in history. but chose to go to grad school in education and become a teacher. I tease her that she went to graduate school in Syracuse because I was on the East Coast and she just wanted to be near me. That wasn't in the script she saw. Sorry about that. Don't tell her that part. She married a preacher, settled down, and had 2 children. Perfect. Fit the script. Well, she might have had a moment or two wondering about marrying this particular preacher. Her sister Carol graduated from high school and went straight from Los Angeles to San Francisco for a brief stint in college before crossing the bay to Oakland, California, where she joined a party, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, with Huey Newton and Erica Huggins, Eldridge Cleaver and Bobby Seale. She spent years of service in the party, long after those figures were gone. Well into the 80s, she later began a doctoral program at Stanford, leaving it for a master's to start a thriving consulting business that supports community development throughout the state of California. They love each other dearly, and we all get together at the same family reunions. The former Panther has a kid who's a naval intelligence officer. And the teacher who married a preacher has the free-spirited, independent child, a singer touring all around the world. You can't script these things. Do them, do you. Assimilate, integrate, resist, revolt. These decisions take place, though, within a larger reality. Jesus found the establishment assimilating, and it made sense. Resistance was futile, results crushed with utter brutality. It wasn't cowardice, it was common sense. Cooperation meant survival. Let's keep our heads down, pay our taxes, and wait for God to deliver us. That's the lesson of our history. Not Jesus. After 30 years of watching, he knew in his bones a change had to come, a new day and time. And don't you wish we knew what he saw, how he felt during those years of carpentry? Had he heard the story of Herod slaughtering innocent children around the time of his birth? Or some more recent atrocity that could be laid at the feet of Caesar? What were the disciplines that fed him, the tragedies that wounded or outraged him? The intimate family dramas or the brutality of the state that angered and inspired what has to be one of the most dramatic mid-career changes in history, from carpenter to prophet. But we know, don't we? It's in the hillside or the seashore talks he gave, the prayers he prayed, the borders of propriety he regularly crossed, the children he gathered to him, the hypocrisy he exposed. He could no longer tolerate hunger and poverty, greed and meanness, injustice and suffering, sadness and empty rituals, clerical garb in Roman closets. He put his tools down and talked about what he knew, what he wanted for us all. And his parables turned common sense inside out and gave new and deeper meaning to the teachings and the traditions he inherited. Jesus knew that common sense can be dangerous if over time it becomes laziness, blind acceptance of the unacceptable, falling asleep too close to where we got in. For a new day to be born, for tomorrow to come, the narrative had to change. Jesus personalizes the punishment meted out to the vineyard in Isaiah, where God stopped the rain and the vineyard became an overgrown wasteland. Jesus put people in the vineyard, landlord, tenants, workers. The grapes don't even get a mention in his telling. Becomes much more explicitly about how we treat each other, about work and workers, about fairness and justice, about accountability, about ultimately ownership and values. Jesus put his community in the parable, the leaders especially, though we must resist the attempt of the early church to point the finger at the Jews. Jesus wasn't making any such indictment. We do better to see ourselves in the story, not any them. But how could it be us? We don't beat the bill collector. We wouldn't stone messengers bearing bad news. We wouldn't kill the heir. This can't be about us, they thought then. We think now. All this Trump bashing, you knew his name had to come up, right? All this wailing about the insanity in which we are now living, all this outrage at injustices piling up, all this blind rage at this blind rage we keep witnessing. We watched his television show. We elected the Congress that doesn't believe health care is a right. Our prisons are filled with too many innocent people, black and brown inmates, way out of proportion to their presence in the population. We are pouring toxins in the ocean and in the air. We are at each other's throats across segregated or gentrified or gated neighborhoods and border walls. We elected this president. Yes, he's our president. A reflection of who we are as a nation. Just ironically, as was President Obama. Oh, we have some work to do. We've put a price tag on what was once the Garden of Eden and everything in it, on it, above it, every living thing, every inanimate object. The world is a marketplace with owners, landlords, shopkeepers, tenants, and shoppers. And still there are slaves and targeted, indiscriminate killing. Somehow it is all worth the cost. This isn't a vision. It's a nightmare. Here is what you get when confusion about ownership of the vineyard prevails, when vision fails. Right now, in Seattle, Washington, government and the private sector have joined forces to build, listen, the Children and Family Justice Center of King County. Well, that sounds great, don't you think? Children and Family Justice Center. What do you think that is? What do you know that is? Let your skepticism loose. Think theater of war. It's a juvenile jail to be built underground on land contaminated by deadly manufacturing materials. And the site won't be cleaned up prior to construction unless a temporary injunction becomes permanent and the project dies. Jesus points the way. God owns the vineyard. That's the powerful truth at the center of this parable. The vineyard is home for us all. That's the powerful vision at the heart of the story. Only our Creator owns everything, says Emerson Powery, a New Testament scholar. We're all tenants leasing out talents God has granted to be used for the greater good of all. We live in this world. We can't escape these landlords and vineyards, tenants, slaves, sons and daughters, and all the entanglements that abound. We can be clear about who we are as we engage one another, each one in their particularity. We won't tolerate treating people like slaves. We will care for the vineyard. God has made us stewards of the whole earth. We won't blame others, and especially any group that's easily targeted and unfairly treated. We won't always point the finger and shout about what someone else has or hasn't done without accepting responsibility for our own behavior. We will write and sing and march and sit and vote and vote and vote and organize and protest, get arrested, pray, worship, work, until the work is done and the harvest is of God. We have no choice but to deal with setbacks, losses, hurricanes, errant administrations, unjust bosses, privileged and unwelcoming neighbors, lecherous landlords, but not with anger, with organization, not with despair, but with hope. Not with resignation, but with renewed energy. Not with vengeance, but with resurrection. Because this is God's vineyard for all. In this and every century, and in the economy of God, we belong to each other, live for each other, responding with strength to love through hurricanes and tragedies of every kind, making change, building beloved community, sharing the fruit of the vine as one human family. It's God's vineyard. That's God's vision. Amen?